Hello and welcome to this edition of the VIP Show. In this episode, I will be interviewing a former American war veteran who has now become one of the leading pro-Palestinian activists in the world today. The VIP is Ken O'Keefe. Ken O'Keefe is part of many groups trying to advance truth, justice and peace all over the world. He is famous for his strong activism for the rights of the Palestinian and Hawaiian people. Ken, thank you very much for joining us on the show. My first question is, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Napa, California, the wine country. I grew up in California, Southern California, mostly San Diego, a little bit in LA as well. So I got the full Southern California experience.
You growing up in America, what was your experience like? You know, how was the America that you knew of before?
I think my experience is very typical, you know, especially as a white middle-class kid growing up in a comfortable suburban environment. I believed, of course, that America is the greatest nation in the world, the bastion of freedom and democracy. I loved my country. And I still love America, the people. I have no hatred for them at all. But I certainly have nothing but scorn for the government of the United States and many of the institutions which are pervasive throughout American society. But as a kid, I didn't know any of this stuff. You know, we say in schools the Pledge of Allegiance. I can recite it to you right now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's what we said every day when we went to school. Now you say that every single day. It gets drummed into your head. The neural pathways get deepened and deepened further and further. And you believe it, even though it's not true. There's not liberty and justice for all in America. That's ridiculous. There's anything but justice for all, especially if you're black or a minority and so many other people, Native Americans, Indians. There ain't no justice for them. But you say that every day and it becomes true. And this is where I was when I joined the Marine Corps at the age of 19. I believed all of this. I didn't challenge it.
Why did you join the Marines at such a young age? Was it compulsory?
I actually had a great job with a French restaurant in a nice part of San Diego. I was making really good money for an 18, 19-year-old, really good money. I really enjoyed the job, but I felt that I was getting a little too comfortable, that things were just a little too easy, and that I was lacking in discipline and initiative, and I thought, the Marine Corps, that's what I need. I now realize, after the fact, many, many years later, that actually I think I was trying to make up for the lack of a father, not having my father around to be that disciplinary figure. This is how I joined the Marine Corps, with this mentality, keeping in mind that I believe my nation is the greatest in the world. I had no idea that the Marine Corps was enforcing corporate policies, you know, tyrannical agendas. Tell
us more about your experiences in the Marine. How long were you there for and what kind of stuff did you do?
Well, I joined the Marine Corps Infantry. I didn't join the Marine Corps to push a pencil. You know, I joined the Marine Corps to get the full experience. So I signed up for the infantry, the grunts, and I went through boot camp and ultimately the School of Infantry at Camp Pendleton in Southern California as well. You know, I took pride in what I did. I did it very well. I was in a high position of power for the amount of time in service that I had. I carried the SAW, the squad automatic weapon, which is, you know, a very important weapon in a fire team, an infantry fire team, and everything was going very well until I reached a point where I actually spoke out about what was a clear abuse of power with my superiors, and ultimately I did what was the right thing, but I got punished severely for having spoken out for what my superiors were doing.
And when was this?
In the summer of 1990. In the Marine Corps, they teach you a couple of things, which I believe in to this day. One, leadership by example. You lead by example. You don't lead from the rear, you lead from the forward position. And you do what you expect others to do below you. This is very, very important. The other thing I very much believe in is putting the mission ahead of the self. You know, you are not as important as the unit, as the whole. This is a very, very beautiful value to have if it's not confined to the military. This is the way I think we should look at the world. The world is more important than me as an individual, and the world is more important than my country. It's not about your country, it's about the rest of humanity, about this beautiful planet we have, and that, to me, that principle is a good thing. But leadership by example was being abused, and I spoke out about it. By doing the right thing, I was punished very severely. It caused a real trauma for me. My life became a living hell. And when I realized that I was being punished for doing the right thing, everything that I thought about the Marine Corps was shattered.
And talk to us about how that slowly then started to maybe make you wake up to certain realities.
Well, what happened to me, because I was being punished unjustly, I reached a point in the Marine Corps where I didn't care anymore. They had punished me by confining me to barracks. Eventually I went to the military jail. My money was taken away, my rank was taken away. So I reached a point where I didn't care anymore. I didn't care what judgment the Marine Corps gave of me because I lost respect for the Marine Corps, at least the leadership that I was dealing with. I also I realized the value of freedom, and while I was in the Marine Corps, I vowed I would never give up my freedom again. And the day that I got discharged from the Marine Corps is, to this day, the happiest day of my life. I swore that I would exercise my freedom to the hilt, and the first thing that I really did was start to commence to a course of independent study. I started reading books like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, about the genocide that we've never even apologized for in the United States committed against the Native Americans. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which completely transformed my idea of what it was to be black in America. Up to that point, I'd been so ignorant and didn't realize the kind of injustice that black people to this day continue to experience, regardless of a black president. And when I studied, I realized, as I got deeper and deeper into it, my God, my birth nation is not only not a friend to popular democracy and freedom around the world, but is in fact the biggest enemy to popular democracy and freedom around the world. And in fact has exported terrorism around the world and committed the worst atrocities of the 20th and 21st centuries without hardly any question, especially if we look at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Vietnam, and so many things that we can cite that are just incredible crimes.
What then did you plan to do?
I started a business in Hawaii, and I started doing really fulfilling work, helping to protect the marine environment, which the ocean is my first love, so it was natural for me to gravitate towards it. But as fate would have it, living in Hawaii, I became involved in the Hawaiian independence movement. And my perspective was very simple. If I was living in Hawaii, and clearly this was somebody else's place before us white folks came there, if I was living there, it seemed to me the least that I could do as a form of respect is to try and understand the people of Hawaii, their history, their culture, and if I could earn their respect while living in their land, this would be ideal. So my involvement in the Hawaiian independence movement made me realize, well, we've committed even more atrocities here in Hawaii. Hawaii is in fact a stolen nation, and the people of Hawaii who haven't forgot who they are, who haven't been totally colonized both physically and mentally, they want their nation back, because Hawaii is Hawaii. It's not America. It's a stolen nation. And
do they still continue to struggle for independence till today?
They do indeed, and I'm actually a Hawaiian national. I served in the Hawaiian government, which is a tremendous honor to have done that. And I'm still very much active and supportive of the Hawaiian nation. And nobody really knows about the Hawaiian independence movement because they have been completely and totally nonviolent. If it had been violent, you probably would have heard about it. And then the United States and the minions in the mainstream media would have said, oh, look at them, they're the violent terrorists and so on and so forth. Of course, this is not the case, but nobody knows. But it was my involvement in the Hawaiian independence movement that ultimately led me towards human rights issues as a whole. My involvement in the Hawaiian independence movement led to me producing a film called The United States of Hypocrisy. Very strong film. I make very strong accusations that I back up in the film, such as the charge that the United States is committing to this day genocide against the Hawaiian people. The way they're doing that is by the measurement of blood and use of blood quantum. It's genocide by the legal definition of the word. And also committing fraud and also breaches of trust, public trust against the Hawaiian people in a furthering of the attempt to completely steal the nation of Hawaii. I also had renounced my U.S. citizenship formally in March of 2001. So I went directly to the State Department and handed them paperwork stating why I was no longer willing to be a U.S. citizen, and stating explicitly why I had every reason to resent and to speak out against the United States for all of its crimes. So I was becoming more and more of a target, and then 9/11 happened. And while I had a beautiful business in Hawaii, I was making money, I was doing what I loved, living in paradise, swimming with dolphins and turtles and all this sort of stuff, I literally fled the country in November of 2001 because I knew that 9/11 back then was some sort of false flag operation, and I knew what was coming. I knew that the death and destruction and war that was going to come from that event was going to be monstrous, and I wanted no part of it.
Why? Did you fear that they'll target you even more, or did you fear that they were going to somehow oblige you to join the army? What was it?
I already had an $11,000 bench warrant issued for my arrest, so the police could come to my house, they could pull me over at any point, and when you pull over a guy like me with an $11,000 bench warrant, the first thing the cops will do is draw their guns, put your hands up, get on the ground immediately, and if you move even slightly slow or do something that's not exactly what they want, I mean, you can be dead very quickly. Again, let's talk to black people in America. How many black people have been murdered simply because they're black? This is what was the reality for me, is that I was a target. This was dangerous. I knew 9/11 was some sort of false flag, and the whole country seemed to believe what they were being told, that 19 hijackers and Osama bin Laden managed this whole operation from a cave in Afghanistan, which to me, even then, seemed beyond ridiculous that people would believe that kind of rubbish. But I left because I knew that I would end up falsely imprisoned or even killed, and really it was a necessary decision for me. So I sought political asylum in Holland and actually entered Holland as a refugee and lived in a refugee camp in Holland.
Join us after the break for part 2 of the VIP show. Welcome back to part 2 of the VIP show. You were stateless because you renounced your citizenship and you didn't have a passport from any other country.
The United States has claimed from the moment that I renounced my citizenship lawfully in 2001 to this very day that I am still a U.S. citizen. Effectively, if you ask the United States, they will tell you that they determine what my political status is, not me, that the right of self-determination doesn't exist, and that states effectively own us as people. If you ask me, was I stateless? Did I have U.S. citizenship? I will tell you, no, I did not. I exited that contract in a lawful, peaceful way. There is no rightful claim for the United States to say that they can determine that I am a U.S. citizen. And yet the United States, to this very day, even though I left the country over 12 years ago, still claims that I'm their property and effectively that I'm a U.S. citizen.
You obtained an Irish passport?
Eventually, I did in 2004. I think 3 years after I left the United States, I did finally obtain Irish citizenship because my grandmother was born and raised in Ireland, and according to Irish law, I was an Irish citizen. I needed only to apply. So very, very fortunate for me, because otherwise I would have been compelled to use a U.S. passport if I wanted to travel, or I would have been confined to Holland, a little country in Europe, and not even able to cross borders in other European states. And
talking about Ireland, they faced colonization from the British Empire, and they fought the British Empire, and you saw the same struggle happening in the Middle East, in Palestine. And when was it? When did you start to get interested in Palestine?
Well, I eventually, what happened for me was, and keep in mind that I was almost totally ignorant about Palestine all the way up into my 20s. I was very, very ignorant. The American people have been lied to so thoroughly and so effectively about Palestine that they really had come to believe, thankfully this is changing now, but most people believe that the poor Israelis, they're having to deal with these rabid dog lunatic Muslim fanatics who want to drive all the Jews into the sea, and they hate them because they're Jewish, and this complete rubbish. But most Americans, I think, I can fairly say, believe this basic narrative. Eventually, I initiated the Human Shield Action to Iraq. I did that in 2002, 2003. Because I knew that the protests and demonstrations were not going to stop the invasion of Iraq. I knew about the Grand Chessboard, Zbigniew Brzezinski. I knew about the Project for a New American Century, the full spectrum dominance agenda, permanent military bases in the region to control the oil reserves, and also to be able to get gas pipelines from the former Soviet Republic to deliver gas through Afghanistan and all this sort of stuff. I knew about these things, and I knew that people were kidding themselves to think that protests were going to stop this. We can kill, for instance, 1 million to 2 million Iraqis, and we don't even apologize for that. Yet we will hear about the 3,000 Western citizens, primarily Western citizens, on 9/11 who died, as if they're incredibly important, that their human value is infinitely more than 1 million to 2 million Iraqis. The Human Shield Action was predicated on this understanding that we don't value life equally. So if our lives are supposedly worth so much more, then we should position ourselves in places that are supposed to be protected by the Fort Geneva Convention, such as water treatment facilities and power plants, places in Iraq that we bombed completely. Both in the first Gulf War and in the second Gulf War, we bombed the infrastructure of Iraq, as you well know. And who does this hurt more than anyone else? It hurts civilians. In particular, it hurts women and children, the most vulnerable, the elderly. That's who it hurts, and that's what we've done. And I wanted to stop that.
And would you say right now, what is the biggest struggle at the moment in today's world?
Right now, I'd say the biggest struggle is to overcome our own prison of the mind. And this is what's happening. More and more people are realizing that what I've been told, what I've been taught, what I have thought to be true is actually not true. Most everything that we've been told is actually the opposite of what's true. So for instance, in America being the greatest nation in the world. Well, if you want to measure greatness in terms of war and violence and mass murder, America is indeed the greatest nation in the world. But if you want to measure it in terms of its greatness with regard to democracy, with regard to freedom, with regard to justice, it is in fact the greatest enemy of all of those things. And this is the world we live in. If you want to understand the world for what it is, you don't go to the news, the mainstream media. If you want to be lied to, you go to the mainstream media. If you want the truth, you're going to need to find it from another source. And this is the world we live in. And once we begin to break free from the prison, the conditioning that has been provided to us, and start to think for ourselves, we start to liberate ourselves.
Who are these few elites controlling the world?
Well, this brings up a really interesting question. There are a lot of people out there who will claim to know who it is exactly. And they'll say, for instance, it's the Vatican, or maybe it's the reptilians, or maybe it's the Jesuits, or maybe it's the Skull and Bone Society, or the Committee of 300, or, you know, we can go on and on and on like this. But this is, I think, a trap for us to sit and argue about this. While I agree that it's very important to know who is actually in power, I believe it's much more important for us to realize one thing, and that is that there is a tiny, tiny minority that has an extreme amount of power. They are using that power in a malevolent way, and we cannot continue to allow this. Baron Rothschild said very, very famously in the 1800s, "I care not effectively what government is in power, as long as I print the money." If you want to understand power, you need to understand who controls the private control of the issuance of money. Debt-based, fractional reserve currency, usury-based fractional reserve currency is the seat of power. Those who control the central banks, the private banks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, those who control those banks control the world effectively. They don't have to fight for money. They have all the money. This isn't about money for them. They have all the money they need. They can print as much money as they want. They can put zeros into any bank account they want. They can buy anything and anyone who can be bought. The only people that cannot be bought are those who value their integrity more than money. Sadly, however, we live in a world where many people have been conditioned into a material belief that their happiness is contingent upon what they can accumulate. So the system has bought off everyone who is willing to prostitute themselves, whether they be in the mainstream media, whether they be in the governments, whether they be in the major corporations. Virtually every aspect of human society, including even charitable organizations, and many places you wouldn't think, have agents who are bought off, whether it's through special branch, MI6, the CIA, or other intelligence services or agents. They have their tentacles everywhere, and they control every aspect of human society that is of any value to them, but they do it through the financial system. And the answer, if you ask me, to how we liberate ourselves, aside from the prison of the mind first, is to take back control of the financial system. John F. Kennedy did that just before he died. He signed an executive order which would have allowed the U.S. government to bypass the Federal Reserve, a private bank, would have bypassed the Federal Reserve and allowed the United States to print its own money once again. He was dead within 6 months. Even Lincoln initiated a policy of using the greenback, which would have been beyond the central bank at that time. If we print our own money, and we do it without usury, without debt associated to it, every single nation on this planet could have an abundant supply of money, and if they only have sensible people controlling the flow of the money and non-usury based, their infrastructure could be built, jobs could be created, they could have world-class education, healthcare, and all of this, all completely necessary if we take control of the financial system. So for me, the solutions are much easier than people realize, but the first thing is to know that it's possible.
That's very interesting, because I was going to ask you what American people should be doing at the moment. You said liberate the minds and then fight the system. Do you think that's going to be possible?
Well, I think the task for the American people is the same as everybody else. However, the stakes are a little bit higher in that America clearly affects the whole world. I know many in this world will celebrate America's downfall, and I can understand that given what America has done. And I mean not just the government, but the people who've sat by and allowed these policies to be perpetuated. However, we still live on planet Earth. We all are brothers and sisters in one human family, and I don't mean that in some trite way. We are. Whether we like it or not, we are. We've been manipulated in so many different ways that we've come to believe that our brother is an enemy. And in fact, many of them are acting as enemies, and they need to be sorted out. If you can't come to be a reasonable person and understand that what's good for you is good for me, if you can't be sensible and live your life in a dignified way and not interfere in an obtrusive way, in a violent way against me, if you are not able to do that, then we need to take care of you. I have no desire to oppress anyone else so that I can have filthy rich, masses of servants and all this kind of material wealth. We just want to live a dignified life. That's sanity, if you ask me. And most people are sane, but again, they've been manipulated. If we want to be free, we need to realize the one simple, incontrovertible truth, and that is that we are, in fact, all brothers and sisters.
So you were famously on the Mavi Marmara, the aid ship towards Gaza, which was stopped by the Israelis, and 9 Turkish citizens were killed. Talk to us about that experience.
Well, the Mavi Marmara was, what an incredible place to be. The Turkish people who organized that, and the crew and all of the people who were passengers, it was an amazing place to be. It was people who felt just like me, enough is enough. We have to do something more than we've done. Whatever the risks, we have to go to Gaza. We have to show the people of Gaza that they are our brothers and sisters, and that we will do everything in our power to stop this kind of horrendous persecution and violence that they're being subjected to. It was really uplifting, and then of course the Israelis attacked in international waters, and what they did was...
It was an act of war.
It was an act of war. We were in a combat situation, and I've been in combat before. We were in a combat situation, except we didn't have combat weapons. They did, we didn't. I feel that God, the universe, whatever you believe in, has looked after me tremendously, because, while I was on that ship, I volunteered to be one of the defenders of the ship, even though I didn't think the Israelis would be so stupid as to do what they did. And I was involved in disarming 2 Israeli commandos. I took possession of one commando's 9mm pistol. I could have killed that commando very easily right then and there. I know how to use a weapon. But of course I had no interest in killing him or anyone else for that matter. But I certainly had an interest in stopping them from killing people, because they were in fact murdering innocent people.
The BBC tried to counter that public opinion and to counter and try to cover up Israel's crimes, and they interviewed you and talked to us about your experiences with the BBC.
When it comes to the BBC doing the story about the Mavi Marmara, they approached me, and I wasn't naive. I know the BBC. I despise them for all of the propaganda that they've been responsible for. And the one thing that I said to Jane Corbin, who was the presenter for this program, keeping in mind they had a Jewish producer, Zionist producer for the program as well, the one thing that I said, and I actually have her on tape acknowledging this, that I insisted on was that if they wanted to interview me, fine, no problem, but they had to at least include in the program that we had 3 of their commandos and that we let them go. Because I knew that destroys the whole narrative that we're the aggressors and that we were violent and they were just defending themselves. Well, then how in the hell is it possible that we would have released them after they killed 9 of our people? We just released them after we had them. Well, what the BBC did was incredible lying. If you watch the BBC Panorama program about this, effectively what they say is they acknowledge that the Israeli commandos had been taken by us, that they were disarmed, but miraculously somehow they managed to effectively escape like Superman, and that's how they escaped. Because we couldn't be acknowledged as having released them, because the whole point of the BBC Panorama program was to cast us as terrorists, or at least terrorist sympathizers, as the aggressors. So this is the BBC for you. Incredible lies. They do it in a nuanced way, so it's not completely and totally obvious, but they're lying propagandists no matter how you look at it.
And lastly, what is your message to the world?
We have the power. We do. Not the governments, not those that control the financial system, not the mainstream media. We do. And in order for the powers that be to get away with their crimes, they have to have at least the facade of consent. If we don't give them the consent, they can't do a damn thing. So let's exercise our power and let's create a sane world. We can all be prosperous. We can live a dignified life. We don't have to be fighting for the crumbs from these son of a bitches who are violating us left, right, and center. I believe that we can have a better world much sooner than we realize if only we take control of our world and take control of this power that we have and ultimately do the right thing.
Ken O'Keefe, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.